We as ADB need to incorporate digital into our DNA. We also need to do more to help the region accelerate its digital transformation. Together, we can emerge from the pandemic stronger, more inclusive, and sustainable.
Hello and welcome to DigitalXADB and today's session on building national spatial data infrastructure. I'm Uni Jung with Digital Technology for Development Unit at ADB and your host for today's session. Before we kick off, we'd like to ask everyone to take a quick poll so that we can get a snapshot of the audience we have today. This will only take a minute. And as you're filling the poll, just a quick reminder that if you're on the virtual event platform, you can use the Q&A function so you can post questions to the speakers. As you're wrapping up the poll, I would like to, now it's my pleasure to invite the moderator of today's session, Mr. Thomas Abel. He's Chief of Digital Technology for Development at ADB. So over to you, Thomas.
Thanks, Uni, and thanks everybody for joining. And just to welcome everybody today as part of our ADB, a series of events. Today's event is going to be focused on building national spatial data infrastructure. This is a very important part of work in development. Spatial data infrastructure is important for governments to be able to manage their infrastructure spatially. That would be all the way from land use and taxation and land ownership, land, and as well as things like agriculture and water and even underground assets like minerals or even pipelines and electrical power facilities. So spatial data infrastructure is something that's rapidly evolving as a technology as well, because there are many software tools and new sources of data to make spatial data infrastructure more useful to governments and for development. So today's event, we're going to talk about some very interesting trends, hear from some experts, and then I will ask some questions from the audience on what you have interests from the presentations from the panelists. So I will start by introducing the first speaker. We're going to have 3 speakers today. And I'll introduce them one at a time before they speak. So the first speaker, welcome Mr. Greg Scott, who's an interregional advisor for the UN Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management, which is UNGGIM. And he joined the UN Statistics Division in 2012 with the task of actually launching and establishing UNGGIM. And growing its relevance and status within member states and other international organizations. Greg is also, as the role of the Secretariat for UNGGIM, is basically provides strategic policy advice and leadership. He previously spent 25 years in Geoscience Australia in several key roles, delivering Australia's national topographical mapping and geospatial programs, and providing independent scientific analysis and advice on geospatial information. So Greg is the exact right person we need to hear from today. And thanks, Greg, for joining us. And I'll hand it over to you. Welcome to the event.
Thank you, Thomas. And I must say it's great to be here. I'm just checking now that I have the right screen being shared and you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Great, great. Thank you. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to actually participate in DigitalXADB. It's I think it's a very exciting forum to have, particularly at this present time. And so what I'd like to do today is spend some time just going through what we've developed in the UN with the World Bank, the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, or the IGIF, as a means to embrace digital transformation and also innovation for countries around the world, particularly developing countries. Just as a starting point, if I may, I wanted to introduce our committee of experts, UNGGIM, and I won't talk about it. I'm just providing the slide which you'll have access to as to what UNGGIM. It's an intergovernmental committee that was established by the UN Economic and Social Council in 2011 to really look at global directions and the use of geospatial information around the world, and very much about addressing a lot of our geospatial challenges, applying them to development, and ensuring that we have authoritative geospatial information readily available to support our local to global development agendas. In terms of these global development agendas, or frameworks as we can call them, they are really underpinned by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, or as we know them fondly, the SDGs. But we also know well about other global frameworks that have evolved over the last 3 to 4 years in the same windows as the SDGs, the Sendai Framework, the Paris Agreement, the Samoa Pathway, the Urban Agenda, and the Oceans Call for Action. These are all global development frameworks. And as they've now been in an implementation phase for the last 5 or 6 years, we're starting to see their dependency on geospatial information and enabling technologies, a close and high dependency on the use of data, technology, and digital transformation. Very much a key element to trying to understand people, place, populations, and their relationship with each other in the environment. And also the ability to think global to local, where we might have global development agendas and global frameworks. It's really at that local level, that community level, at the citizen level, which is where things like SDGs need to be both implementable and visible, and being able to understand how we make interventions, how we make change, and how we also measure and monitor. So from a geospatial perspective, this is very important in terms of development. When we think about digital transformation, we're seeing it every day, and I'm sure all colleagues in the ADB are very, very familiar with all of these disruptive technologies that are around us now. They're almost pervasive. But what they do, this innovation, this technology, this disruptive nature provides us with a huge amount of opportunity. But at the same time, what it's also doing is growing society's expectations. Expectations on how we use data, how we use technology, how we record what is happening where around the world, and how we see at a very high level of resolution the changing nature of our world and our environment, and how we see that in that nature and that pace of change that happens is very, very rapid. And if we think about that in another way in terms of a geospatial aspect, we can see on the top right-hand side, we can see where technology and innovation is really leaping ahead when we think about machine learning, virtual reality, the artificial intelligence concepts, and also acquisition technologies are really growing our capabilities to understand our world, both above and below planet Earth. But at the same time, we're also seeing many challenges for the developing world in terms of their ability to make progress. Now, when we see the 2030 agenda that was adopted in 2015, it was noted that the spread of information and communications technology and the interconnectedness around the world had a huge potential to accelerate human progress, to bridge the digital divide, and to develop knowledge societies and technological innovation. And when we think about the geospatial aspect of that, I would argue that thinking about these ICT capabilities around technology and innovation, is that when we apply that to data and information systems, particularly when we think about measuring and monitoring development agendas, it needs more than that. It's not just about technology and innovation, it's about leadership, strategic policy leadership within and across countries to bring around that transformational change. And when we think about geospatial information, because it's a heavy digital technology, as we know, when we think about the types of data and the bulk of that data that's available, is that not only are we trying to bridge the digital divide around the world, we're actually trying to bridge the geospatial digital divide, which continues to inhibit development in many countries around the world. And it's because of that bridging of the geospatial digital divide that we in UNGGIM and in partnership with the World Bank, I think we went on a journey in 2017 to see whether we could develop a framework, an overarching geospatial framework to assist countries, particularly developing countries, in bridging that geospatial digital divide. And the outcome of those early thinkings in 2017 is now the integrated geospatial information framework. So if we look at the global development frameworks, and now I bring beside that all of the work that UNGGIM has done over the last decade in terms of its global geospatial frameworks, the pillar or the pinnacle of all of those frameworks is the IGIF. And we use that IGIF as our framework to be able to apply geospatial capabilities to our global development frameworks. And so for the rest of my presentation, I'm going to talk about this IGIF and what it is. It's a multidimensional framework. It's very much aimed at strengthening national geospatial information management in countries. And as I mentioned earlier, particularly developing countries. It comprises an overarching strategic framework, an implementation guide, and country-level action plans. So it has three parts: strategy, implementation, and action. The focus is about integration, the ability for geospatial information to be integrated with any other meaningful data to solve our societal and environmental problems. And it's there to act as a catalyst for economic, social, and environmental growth, stimulating understanding and stimulating policy and decision-making according to national development priorities. So what I will do now in the remainder of my presentation is I will go through each of those three parts of the IGIF: the strategy, or why geospatial is important; the implementation guide, what do we do to enable ourselves to implement a framework; and the action plans on how, when, and who does this. So looking at part one, the overarching strategic framework, which was adopted in 2018 by the Committee of Experts, UNGGIM, it sets the context, the policy context, and the strategic context as to why geospatial information management is a critical element of national, social, and economic development. It is very much aimed at decision makers. It's very forward-looking and it's aspirational in terms of where we want to be. What's our vision? What's our mission? And it does this through strategic drivers, underpinning principles, goals, and strategic pathways. And you can see a snapshot of some of our high-level strategy in these slides. The key link between all of the different elements of the IGIF is that last diagram on the bottom right-hand side, our jigsaw puzzle, our strategic pathways, as we call them. And I'll talk a little bit about those just now. So in essence, when we think about the benefits to society on the IGIF, we can see those around the edge of this box: knowledge, decisions, development, the economy, applications, value to citizens and users, the use of technology, etc. And we have within the strategic pathways three groups of three, if I can call it that. We have three strategic pathways influenced by governance of institutions, policy and legal, and financial components. In the middle three strategic pathways are the technology pathways: data, innovation, standards. And the areas that we would commonly refer to, given a bit around governance and policy, is our national spatial data infrastructures, or our SDIs. And the third component or influence is people themselves, a pathway on partnerships, capacity and education, communication and engagement. And when we think about development, particularly the developing world, and the reliance on partnerships and international collaboration and coordination, having capacity and capability and the appropriate education, both in academia, but also professional education, is vitally important. And how we engage with decision makers, how we engage with leaders and communicate the value of geospatial information is one of the hardest challenges for many developing countries around the world. And we've also arguing that strategic pathway 1 on governance and strategic pathway 9 on communication are really the bookends for the strategic pathways of the IGIF, because those two pathways are the most critical in terms of implementation of any policy, and let alone a national geospatial information program or policy. So we call these strategic pathways the IGIF puzzle, which we solve. Now, those strategic pathways form many components. At the highest level, they have a series of elements, 36 key elements. So if I just go back one slide, you can see with each of those strategic pathways, we have 4 key elements for each of those. And they then go down into much detail when we get to the implementation guide, which I'll talk a little bit about now. The implementation guide was adopted in September 2020. It's incredibly detailed. It explains what specific guidance and options can be taken by countries in implementing the IGIF. It expands on each of those strategic pathways. It uses the key elements, and it captures strategic to operational needs for implementing an IGIF. And it uses many references, good practices, guiding principles, actions, and deliverables to do that for each of the 9 strategic pathways. It also has a common look and feel about each chapter in the implementation guide. So just quickly, by ways of example, if we look at strategic pathway 1, governance and institutions, on the left, you can see the 4 key elements, and you can see the structure of each chapter from 1 through to 11. And it's anchored by key diagrams in each of the pathways. Here, this overarching diagram explains many of the components of that strategic pathway: principles, actions, interrelated actions, outcomes. And it even gets broken down more into detail as to what they may look like. What are those guiding principles? What are those actions? What are those interrelated actions? And how do we actually look at using them as a series of guides and principles for implementation into a country level action plan? And here we can see the individual actions that are broken down into different components as well. From, for example, forming leadership, establishing accountability, setting directions, creating a plan of action, and tracking success, etc., for that particular pathway. And that applies across all 9 strategic pathways. But there's one other chapter. There's an introductory chapter to the implementation guide. We call it Solving the Puzzle. The key reason this chapter is in there is it not only explains how the implementation guide and how the IGIF is used, but it also puts in there key messages, including also what the IGIF is and is not. Here I just highlighted some really important text in the introduction around the impediments that many countries around the world still face, and the fact that they do not get opportunity to participate in transformational change with geospatial capabilities. Yet this change is essential to support national development, economic prosperity, and a global and thriving information economy. Many countries still need to bridge the geospatial digital divide. This requires building capacity for people, establishing governance, and implementing data, technology, and processes to sustain a national geospatial information capability. Now, you will understand that many of those pieces are also key components of a national spatial data infrastructure, or an SDI. But importantly, if we look on the second side of this slide, the IGIF is not an infrastructure, it's a framework. It's independent of SDIs and NSDIs and other infrastructures. It's literally a framework to guide us how we may build and implement our infrastructures, whatever they may look like. Importantly, the IGIF recognizes and builds upon all that is previously done around SDIs. So it's not about replacing an SDI with the IGIF, it's augmenting it, building more about it, because it has frameworks and concepts that build upon the structure and the reasoning and evidence as to why NSDIs are important. So imagine with many countries as they try to go on their journey to implement an SDI, it's not just computers and boxes and disk space and software and people. There's more to it. There's a lot around having understanding on the use of standards, having governance in place, having sustainability in place. And the IGIF provides all of those means and the reasoning to do that. And more importantly, aligned to national priorities. Finally, I just want to touch now on the country level action plans, or our CAPs. These are really the action that countries build and develop themselves. These are unique action plans that countries develop in terms of building their IGIF for the nation. A key point about this is that each country level action plan that a country may develop is unique to their own environment. It's not, we do have examples and resources and tools, but they can be unique implementations according to national circumstances. And an important component of the country level action plan is that it is a plan. It's a plan of action so that subsequent implementation and resources and funding can be used. And so the implementation guide provides all of the tools for each of those country level action plans, which are actually now being developed and adopted and used by many countries around the world, but using different methodologies. With us within the UN, we have a methodology. We have a set of tools and resources. The World Bank has the same. There's a separate set of tools and resources and diagnostics. FAO is doing the same, and a number of countries such as Norway and Sweden and others are also developing diagnostics. But importantly, they're all based on the IGIF and its implementation guide and the 9 strategic pathways. By way of example, and I won't touch on this, this is my second to last slide, there are many elements in a country level action plan that start right at a rationale. Why are we doing this? And then developing a vision and a mission and goals. Why are we doing this? What's the strategic need? What's the alignment amongst agencies? What's this going to cost? How do we schedule it? What are the outcomes? What's the risk? All of these components are all provided in the implementation guide in the country level action plans as they're being developed. So it's a holistic approach to developing a sustainable program within countries for building geospatial capability across government, and for society in many thematic areas. So importantly, just as a summary, the IGIF is for strengthening geospatial information management, to assist countries bridge the geospatial digital divide, and to secure socio-economic prosperity. It's a framework for the world. It has a reference guide for developing and strengthening national arrangements, designed specifically for developing and low to middle income countries, but is also being used around the world now by developed countries as a means to leverage their existing capabilities. And with that, I will conclude and thank you for the opportunity and look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg, for the great presentation. And folks, if you have questions for Greg or the other two speakers, feel free to put those in the chat window or the question window, and we will get to them after the two additional presentations. So our next presenter is Mr. Jung-Hyun Yoon, who's a senior manager for the Korea Land and Geospatial Informatics Corporation, LX, which is a public entity. And Mr. Yoon has expertise in land, cadastral, GIS, and management systems, as well as capacity building within the Korean Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, and Transport. He started his career in 2001 as a cadastral surveyor and was a member of LX's Research Institute as well in the area of data acquisition and land management. He also previously worked as a secondee for the World Bank and UN Habitat and has done geospatial projects around the world. So we're very happy to have Mr. Yoon. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for your introduction to me. So I'd like to share my presentation. Okay, honestly, it is a great opportunity to join this meaningful event and to be able to share Korea's experience and others regarding establishing a national spatial data infrastructure as a foundation of a digital land administration environment. I have looked over the list of the panelists, and then I'm happy to know the panelists are very well casted. I believe Mr. Scott, who is working at the UN, can explain the story of NSDI in the viewpoint of the international organization. And Ms. Anktu can do it from the viewpoint of the government side. And from my side, as an implementing public agency and a developer for land project in Globe, I can share project experience in many countries in terms of the development of a land information system with you. These images are very well known in the world to explain the concept of NSDI. Some said the 7 components, and others did the 6 or 5 and 8 components for establishing NSDI. From this suggested concept, we can arise some questions like this. Actually, NSDI is essential and or fundamental concept and approach for digital-based land administration. Are all those components mandatory for establishing an NSDI, or if 1 or 2 have been missed, establishment of an NSDI could not be possible? What component is the most important and urgently introduced? What is the best way to introduce an NSDI, 1 by 1 or all at once? If land data is existing, whatever paper-based or digital, how to implement NSDI, how to harmonize the existing data and new survey data. Those questions have been issued from the countries where they want to introduce the NSDI concept for operating their system and or data through the e-governmental platform. From this slide, I'd like to share Korea's experience on the issue of the NSDI. How about Korea in the past? As you may know, South Korea had experienced a very difficult time due to the Korean War in 1950s. The war caused many casualties and displaced people, and more than 80% of Korea's infrastructure and facilities were completely destroyed. At the time, Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world with a per capita income of less than 70 US dollars. But what about now? From the ruins of this war, it took only about 50 years for Korea to rise to what it is today. Korea is the only one country in the world that has changed from a recipient country to a donor country and is currently one of the OECD DOG members. Today, per capita income is over 32,000 US dollars and has grown by about 430 times compared to the 1950s. It is the country that hosted the Summer and Winter Olympic Games, World Games, and World Championship and Athlete. The electronics and IT industries represented by Samsung and LG are considered as the best one in the world. What drove this incredible economic growth? Have you heard of Miracle of Han River? This refers to the success story of Korea economic growth, which has grown from one of the world's poorest countries to one of the world's top countries. There will be a number of factors for this economic growth. World-famous Korean educational fever, professional athletes caused as a workaholic, intensive and aggressive investment in high-tech fields represented by ICT, and in high-speed internet network, etc. There were many other factors. But why is Korea's economic development model special? In addition to the intensive investment and construction of basic social overhead capital such as roads, airports, power plants, sewage facilities, and schools, the Korean government focused on another key element, land development. In other words, land has become a very fundamental part of all kinds of economic activities. The Korean government correctly recognized that accurate, transparent, and effective use of land and the establishment of policies based on it are the most fundamental issues for Korea's sustainable economic growth. As a result, the Korean government decided to invest heavily in the modernization of land administration and cadastral system as one of the key pillars of economic growth. Yes, Korea too has experienced various land problems and challenges that almost every country has experienced or is experiencing. For example, the rapid economic growth caused the skyrocketing land price, especially in Seoul, which was one of the reasons for the numerous land disputes. In addition, illegal exploitation and the lengthy urban expansion and planning had caused the numerous problems. In addition to the social issue we discussed earlier, there were also many problems in Korea in terms of data sharing among relevant organizations. There was a lack of awareness of data standards or integrated management system at the national level, such as disparate land information and data produced by governmental ministries and agencies, redundant systems, and interministerial conflicts over the production and ownership of land information. In other words, there were many trial and errors before the integrated land management system currently used in Korea was established. As you can see on the screen, the cadastral system in Korea was established in 1910, and through a series of processes, the data on the paper-based has been converted into 100% digital and managed and operated under the land management system. What's notable here is that this land informatization process is not being conducted exclusively in the field of cadastre and land administration. As I explained earlier, the Korean government recognized the importance of efficient land use and management. So it had the most basic concept that all ministries and agencies should be able to use the same land information in the same format. In order to realize this, the government promoted the computerization of the land registration in accordance with the e-government strategy and computerized all cadastral map and records according to the NSCI strategy. Through the NSCI strategy, we have established the basic system for the creation, management, and operation of the single data, such as data standard, land information acquisition, metadata, and geo-information services, and partnership between governmental agencies or between government and private sectors. As a result, all land information is currently managed, updated, and distributed in the same format in one integrated land management system. From Korea's experience, we can see and witness that a national level NSDI strategy is the center of the digital land information system. On the basis of NSDI, Korea's e-government system could make it success. In line with this, what approach is the best way to introduce NSDI for developing countries? Under the former experience, an ideal way to start from framework, including policy, regulation, organization, etc., and then move to standard. After developing standards under concrete consent from various related stakeholders, unified spatial data could be collected, even if there are various data creators. Metadata could be developed for web portal as one of the digital services, and partnership with external users like public could be designed. But how about in reality? In many developing countries, land data especially, land data have been collected, created, updated without any standards and or regulation. As we all know that this situation can have a big impact on interoperability among data. And in serious cases, more cost and more time and more steps are required to solve this problem. In this case, when data is existing, standard and framework could be designed at the first step. And then, based on those frameworks, a land information system could be set and developed. Using unified data under the land information system, various services could be provided via GeoPortal. Also, at this stage, metadata for GeoPortal could be developed. Recognizing the importance of NSDI, ADB developed a TA project for development of Armenia's spatial information standard and GeoPortals on September 1st. The project will provide advisory support to help to develop the national spatial data infrastructure of the Republic of Armenia by developing national geospatial data standards and draft terms of reference for integrated multifunctional national GeoPortal development. This will result in the efficient and integrated land administration system operational nationwide in the Republic of Armenia. The NSDI should be developed based on the existing systems, and the task will be carried out in close relationship with the Cadastral Committee in Armenia. The project has been developed timely, and it will contribute to improving the Armenian cadastre as a unified and integrated foundation. From the previous cases, what is the most important factor for introducing NSI? Firstly, central government will and strong leadership are needed. Since many existing institutions claimed their vested interests and produced the data in their way, it is more important to create a legal system in which all data can be produced, maintained, and managed in one format at the national level, which is the role of the central government. And after setting an NSDI frame, all stakeholders should follow this guideline in collaboration and cooperation with each other. Also, the reason why NSDI develops and introduced is to operate the digital-based land information system and to provide unified data and information to the stakeholders, including the public in real time. So data updating and maintenance is another key issue. To realize the land information system and NSDI, basic infrastructure such as the internet, electronic powers could be well prepared and established. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Yoon, and story about the successful implementation of a nationwide system, especially the being able also to help other countries implement their systems, and I'm sure we'll have some questions on that. So thanks again, and then we'll go to our third speaker, who is Ms. Baryama Inkter from Mongolia. She is a National Spatial Data Infrastructure expert and former head of the Geospatial department within the Mongolia Land Administration Agency. And she has been in charge of NDSI related projects for the Mongolia agency since 2013. She's also engaged in several projects with the United Nations and World Bank. And under the guidance of the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, she focused on development of the National Geoportal of Mongolia to disseminate fundamental geospatial data, to adopt international geospatial standards, and to create a legal framework by formulating laws and information licensing policies. And she's currently working as a consultant within the agency. So welcome, Ms. Inkter, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. So could everybody see my presentation?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank
yeah.
you. So thank you for ADB for giving me this opportunity to share Mongolian experience on developing NSDI. So it's such an honor. So before I start, I would like to emphasize that work I'm presenting here is work done by the LNGC, which is the Mongolian National Mapping Agency, and with the support from the World Bank and UNGGM as well. So for today's session, the Building NSDI, I would like to share the Mongolian experiencing how we are implementing IGF for strengthening the infrastructure. So, and in order to emphasize the geospatial infrastructure is an integral part of the digital development, I'd like to briefly talk about how Mongolia is progressing towards becoming a digital nation, and what are the next moves and what are the main challenges. So as Mr. Greg Scott spoke about the IGF in his comprehensive presentation, the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework plays important role in Mongolian NSDI development. So it has 8 goals with 9 strategic pathways, and this IGIF provides us a systematic approach to tackle all the challenges and window to see all aspects of NSDI. And so Mongolia has a long history. So Mongolia has making so much effort to build their own NSDI since earlier 2000, and centering around the traditional NSDI concepts and components. So focused on building the cooperation and among the government agencies, experiencing new technologies and trying to formulate the action plans, etc. As you see from this diagram, we are neglecting some important part, especially for the financial model and how to track the investment, partnership, and most importantly, innovation part. And somehow managing to cover other components of NSDI that are stated in the IGIF. When IGF introduced by the UNGGM and the World Bank, so I would say that the next level of Mongolian NSDI development has started. So it provides a strategic framework, why geospatial information is important and what actions needs to be taken in implementing IGF. And in late 2018 and 2019, the LMGC has given the great opportunity to conduct the two main projects, which is sponsored by the UNGGIM, the Strengthening Geospatial Information Management in Developing Countries towards implementing the SDG 2030 agenda. So Mongolia has selected one of the 6 countries for this project. And the next one is that the World Bank has given us a technical assistance to assess the current NSDI situation and as well as the socio-economic impact analysis. So thanks to those projects, we have a great opportunity to comprehensively implement our action plan for strengthening the NSDI. As apart from the result, as a result, the LMG has a country level action plan and an investment plan as well. So what are the actions that needs to be implemented and what are the total cost and what's the return on investment? So here you can see in the 2019, when the IGF introduced the baseline survey has conducted, and it showed that what are the status of each strategic pathways in Mongolian NSDI development. As you can see that there are some efforts in governance and legal framework and data itself. However, we are lacking in some financial strategic pathways, innovation, standards and partnership and capacity building, etc. So this is this diagram and this baseline survey give us a clear direction. What's the next step? So, and LMGC put so much effort to digitalize their existing data as well as creating database management system in like last decades. As you can see from the Mr. Yoon's presentation, Mongolia also had a journey through the digitalized own data into this database management system. So the UNGGM has provided the minimum list of global fundamental geospatial data theme in 2017. So Mongolia, based on that, Mongolia has reclassified the fundamental geospatial information into 16 themes. So making sure this data is fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So lots of efforts are at the moment going on. So adopting the data specification for this fundamental geospatial information and developing the GeoPortal database management system and share through this GeoPortal all this information. So next thing, the World Bank has given us opportunity to talk with the Ministry of Finance people by calculating socio-economic benefits of geospatial information. So it's a great opportunity to attract more investment and also what are the demonstrable benefits from the implementing this NSDI. And the World Bank team interviews with more than 25 stakeholders among the organizations, including the governments and state-owned enterprise and private sector companies. And this World Bank team identified over more than 16 use cases where there are demonstrable benefits, and calculated socio-economic benefits and drafted the action plan and investment plan. So apart from these results, I would say this work has also helped us to engage more with the cabinet officials, the government and higher level officers, and as well as the other ministries and agencies to raise awareness and importance of this NSDI. As I said, there are more than 60 specific use cases has been identified in this calculation of the socioeconomic benefits. So those cases are particularly aligned with the priority sectors set by the Mongolian government. So sectors with the positive impacts where geospatial information and the NSDI has shown to deliver a significant return on invest. As you can see, there are many use cases. So 10 use cases are used in the calculation. So for example, land administration and national sectoral development planning, e-governments, mining, and disaster risk management system, etc. So there are the main sectors that has a great impact from the NSDI development. And here you can see that 10 use cases are used in the calculation of benefits. For example, the improved geospatial data sharing will reduce the cost of the collection and maintenance of the data and making sure that data is usable, and better disaster management. So the fully operational GIS will reduce the level of damage from being able to respond to extreme weather events and natural disaster, as well as the wildfire and pandemic as well. And the improved collection of land use and fees and collection of taxes, so etc. So there are 10 use cases that are used in the benefits. So based on the socioeconomic benefit calculation, so major 12 actions are identified in the investment plan, as well as the NSDI action plan. For example, the One Map database system, the completion of the land cadastral registration, and national job portal, to data sharing policy, and 3D city model, and densification of the geodetic network for the better data acquisition, and the National Geospatial Center of Excellence, etc. And so here are the here you can see the 10, the investment plan, their actions needs to be done. And the investment accounts to 35 million. So this is spread over 5 years project plan and cost benefit analysis over 12-year period. So it shows the benefits cost ratio is 2.5, indicating the economic availability and attractiveness of this project. The NSDI project is important. So here is the proof, and that we could talk with the Ministry of Finance or Prime Minister that, hey, if you invest on this NSDI project, we will have some benefits, etc. So it was very helpful. And so implementation of this NSDI will deliver the government efficiencies, business growth, and social and environmental benefits to the Mongolian government. The results shown these three major benefits. So like creating job opportunities, and especially using the ICT sector So promoting the innovation and using the disruptive technologies, and as well as improved public sector efficiency. So which leads to the digital development, the e-government, and generating benefits to the citizen through the increased efficiency of the road navigation and emergency system, and etc. So there are many benefits has been identified through this work, and thanks to the IGF and the World Bank effort. And so here, we based on this analysis and calculation, we have an NSDI action plan is prepared. So with the 4 main goals with 8 principles, and there are 44 independent actions to align with these 9 IGF strategic pathways. So we have the vision of this NSDI action plan, so geo-driven e-government and innovation that empowers efficient and effective use of geospatial information, so towards the national sustainable development and economic growth. So 4 main goals are making sure that the quality information, accessible and usable, and good governance around the geospatial legal policy and the standards, and maximize innovation to improve the human capacity. And here are the actions that are identified in the NSDI action plans. As you can see, the government part, there are 3 main strategic pathways. The actions are identified, and most of the actions are now undergoing and now in progress. For example, the endorsing an SDI law. So it's a very long journey. We've been trying to have the NSDI since 2004, the 8th. So it's been a long journey. And also the policy and legal framework around the data sharing policy, and etc. And here you can see that the technology part, the data, those data-related actions needs to be carried out. So there are many more actions in there. So for example, establish the data framework and updating the geographic names and address system, and provide a national comprehensive, complete cadastral registration system, etc. And the next one is that around the people, there are actions that are identified, especially for the capacity and education. So it's more important. So the humans are doing the work. So it's important to focus on the developed human capacity who can use the geospatial information technologies and capabilities. So in the NSDI action plan, there are some action that has been already in progress, as I mentioned, and had their outcomes produced already. For example, LMGC has carried out major geo-related projects. So for example, establishing Geo portal, making sure fundamental geospatial information is findable, accessible, interoperable with other systems, and reusable. So it aims to provide a master map or one map to all among the citizen, businesses, and government. And also next main major project is the e-land platform for cadastral registration system and integrated land planning, transparent and open land marketing, reliable and land evaluation. So based on the suitable analysis. So it will help to improve the e-taxation, etc. And the next one is the national street, the address system, and e-urban system, which is one for the urban planning and building registration system. This will move forward to the building information management system, BIM. So these are the main base supporting platform for the digital development at the moment. So while I'm saying the digital development, I would like to emphasize on this vision that I set by the Mongolian government. So since the NSDI is an integral part of the digital development of Mongolia, is ambitious to become a digital nation and to leading a country in Asia in terms of the prosperity by 2050. So in 2020, Mongolia endorsed the National Long-Term Development Policy, which is called the Vision 2050, covering SDG goals. So it has 9 fundamental goals centering around the society, economy, and environment. So I'd like to emphasize on this one goal, which is good governance. So as you, one of the 9 fundamental goals is the good governance, to develop an effective and efficient e-governance to promote human development. For example, to increase the e-government development index into 0.8 by the 2030. So in 2018 UN e-government survey, the Mongolia has ranked 92nd place, and EGD index with the 2.58. But we're trying to increase in the 2050 by the 0.9. As you may all aware of that, this UN survey 2020 is already published, and now we have a EGD was a 2.65, so which already surpassed the goal that we are set in 2025, which indicates how Mongolia government is developing rapidly. And so you may already heard about the Mongolian digital government in yesterday's digital connectivity session by the chairwoman of SITA, and has an idea about what are the main activities and goals around the ICT sector and digital development. However, I would like to draw your attention to this nice illustration, which I borrowed by from one of my SITA colleagues. So Mongolia has a long history developing e-government. So in early 2017, Mongolia faced a new phase of its ICT development when the state policy on development of ICT for 2017 to 2025 was introduced by the government. So the policy envisioned that ICT advancement accelerates the Mongolian growth. So this SITA, the ICT sector, focusing on to creating digital transformation ecosystem. So which you can see that there are the digital infrastructure is essential. That's for sure. And also e-services for the many sectors like e-health, e-education, and tax and transport, land and registration, and also the facilitating public services for such as e-Mongolia, the integrated platform to serve the online services to the citizen. And I'd like to draw your attention to this base supporting system of this ecosystem, which is including the geospatial part. Here you can see that Mongolia government, especially for the ICT sector, has the idea about how important this job platform is for this digital transformation ecosystem. So it's very important achievement while we are developing the NSDI. So Mongolia, the government of Mongolia understood that NSDI is essential for the e-government services as well as the decision making and policy planning. So here's some integrated public e-service platform, e-Mongolia. You heard about the yesterday's session. So it's now containing more than 500 services from the different government agencies and ministries. So it not only facilitates the service to the citizen, it promotes government and business efficiencies. For example, the most used services is the COVID vaccine certification. So people can easily get the vaccine certification to travel or to the cinema, and also payment of social insurance, driver ID and ticketing information, etc. So what I'd like to say is that now this system, this e-services, e-government services now needs to be integrated more with the Geospatial platform. So the government decision-making and planning platform that needs to be integrated with the NSTI. NSTI is not providing the data itself, it's also supporting the decision-making progress. So the challenges while struggling, while we are implementing the NSTI, Mongolia is facing many challenges in terms of implementing IGF. I'd like to emphasize these are 3 main challenges among 9 strategic pathways, but it doesn't mean that the other challenges are not important. So first one is strong leadership. LMGC has proven great leadership implementing NSTI. So thanks to the former and existing current leaders of LMGC, we are at where we are today. So leadership and cabinet level, the high level of decision-making level of leadership is required at the moment, at this age of digital development. And secondly, capacity development. So while we are implementing NSTI and attracting investment and creating standards for interoperability, the humans are doing the work. So we need to making sure that the human resource with a strong leadership will address other challenges and making sure some investment on the development of human capacity. And other one is that partnership. So partnership with the international organization like ADB and World Bank, and also partnership with the private sector will attract investment and facilitate all the efforts and lead forward to the NSTI achievement. So empowering government with the NSTI will lead to the digital nation, with the geo-driven digital nation. So I'd like to conclude that the Mongolian NSTI development is amazingly accelerated by the IGF, and that's for sure. With the better geospatial information at hand, we will be able to make a better decision for a sustainable society, economy, and environment to achieve the Vision 2050. And we are very much looking forward to the result of the implementation of NSTI action plan. So I'd like to emphasize that NSTI is not for providing data to the decision makers. It's an integral part, it's an essential infrastructure to the decision-making systems. So I'd like to conclude NSTI vision. NSTI is for geo-driven e-government and innovation that leads to national sustainable development and economic growth. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Inkter. Very good presentation and great progress you're making. And I think it's especially interesting to see how Mongolia is trying to become a digital nation. And I agree that your comment that the national spatial data infrastructure is going to be foundational for that, as any nation that becomes digital needs to have the spatial data and the land basically data as the foundation. And I think that's also what we heard from Mr. Yoon in Korea's successful example. So it's good we have the good 2 successes. And so we will go and answer some questions now. The first question, actually, we have one question from the audience, so I'll go ahead and do that. And then if anybody else has questions, feel free to type those in. So the first question is from Darlene, who is asking about poor countries like the Philippines that have many problems providing services to citizens, including security, cybersecurity, and being hacked, their systems getting hacked. And Darlene was asking is, how do you manage the security digitized infrastructure, especially something like land infrastructure, you know, where maybe property taxes and things like that. And how could you advise a country like the Philippines that doesn't have a deep expertise to implement these systems under this, you know, difficult security situation? Maybe we can start with Ms. Inkter, since you just finished your talk, and we asked the other two panelists about this question as well.
So while we are developing and talking about the digital transformation, the cybersecurity is important. So it's more of a work of digital infrastructure. When you're trying to build your digital infrastructure, ensuring your data and system is secure. So the cybersecurity issue should be included in the infrastructure. So it's not my area of expertise. So the ICT, the CETA, the Mongolian government of ICT sector, they're dealing with the cybersecurity. So now they're working on how all this infrastructure and the information is secured by the other attacks or any risk.
Great, thank you. Mr. Yoon, do you have any thoughts on that question?
On the issue of the cybersecurity, as you know, originally land ownership data is very private and should be protected from the other access. So when we designed the land information system on the basis of the NSDI concept, maybe even though just security component is not included in that some concept of the NSDI diagram, but it is very important to keep the room to protect any sensitive data inside of the land information system. So nowadays, I'm not sure to deliver the correct answer about this question. I'm not just an expert of the ICT, but I have known that nowadays some attack from the outside of the country also, as well as inside the country, to assess the land ownership and the land records. That kind of some tries has been just increased. So I have known that maybe Korean government using some blockchain technology to make some exercise that's some very difficult to solve that keyword, and then maybe government just at the government level they try to just keep that very important and sensitive data. So I believe that when just a country want to introduce an NSDI concept, beyond that original just components, security especially, as you know, just a land information system and NSDI is operational on the basis of a digital environment. So that security issue should be considered seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's very insightful, and I would say it could be similar to the finance area, where there are certain data like the land boundaries or the land zoning or even imagery of land that's just not as sensitive. So you may be able to make that public, but then of course ownership and titles and those kinds of things, there's probably not any reason to make those information public. And of course they have to be highly secured like any financial asset would be. And I think that would be something that most countries would follow. There's probably standard ways to do it. Thanks. Then Mr. Scott, do you have any thoughts on that question?
No, thanks, Thomas. I think it's been well covered. The only thing I would just add is that any system is really only as strong as its weakest link. And I guess when you look across multiple sectors, whether it's banking and finance, transport, health, communications, different sectors, is that security and cybersecurity threats are going to be quite common. I think where the geospatial paradigm is a little bit unique, particularly in a lot of developing countries, is that it tends to deal with big chunks of data. And to a degree, where that data is stored, how it's stored, and how it's transported through systems and networks is often where some of those weak links are. And often we store data on boxes and we don't have it in a network system, all these things. So it really does come down to, I guess, risk and security of information, as everyone's commented on.
Great, thanks. I would say one thing that I've always been saying is that geospatial data also, when you're talking about imagery, satellite imagery, there's usually not as much privacy concerns there. And that actually makes it a good source of development data when you can use that data. You don't have to go and gather difficult surveys from individuals and personally identifiable data. So we find that satellite imagery is something that integrates well into national spatial data infrastructure and is widely available and is not as privacy concerning or security concerning as something. So it's in some ways maybe a little bit easier to use. I wanted to ask Mr. Scott another question for you, which is, we as a development organization are trying to foster, countries in our region to develop comprehensive national spatial data infrastructure. And how would you give us advice, or what advice would you give us on how we could use the IGIF to advance our work in this area?
Thanks, Thomas. In fact, I think Bayamar has just given an exemplar of just that, to be honest. But I think just from our experience that we've seen over the last couple of years is one thing that the IGIF does, particularly when we're talking about developing countries and I guess influence, it's about influence, is that the IGIF contains all the language, it contains the messages, it tells you why this capability is important, it tells you about benefits and why you need to be able to use STIs anchored to national priorities. It explains benefits across sectors, it looks at societal benefits, economic benefits, environmental benefits, but it becomes, and I'll use Bayamar's words that I noted, was it becomes a catalyst for you to engage with cabinet, with politicians, with your decision makers. And so you're starting to use the language that economists and the political community want to hear, not our technical language. And I think that was something that we spent a lot of time on learning around the IGIF, is the key messages, the messages that aren't what we're used to hearing. They're messages that the wider community and government leaders need to hear and to get their understanding in short grab. I think that's the biggest thing. All of the detail we as experts can deal with. It's really about that value proposition and being able to turn something that could be novel into a sustainable program of work for a country.
Great. And just a follow-up question on that. Do you think these programs are investable from development banks as standalone projects, or do you think they generally need to fit into a larger, program?
That's a good question. I think it's a bit of both, and so it depends on what that investment looks like, what the size of the country is, the size of the economy. So for example, work that we're doing in small countries like Fiji and the Kingdom of Tonga, where there's a great level of influence from the land sector into the political process. It's that argument isn't necessary. It's more about, okay, this makes sense, let's do it. But in other economies, particularly where it's not so much understood on what that value is, and if you're thinking about, very much around transformation, e-commerce, e-government, e-services, e-health, all of that, it tends to resonate. And so often it's about hooking it into the broader program of government. And this is one of the things that we've said about the IGIF. The IGIF is not a capability for a national mapping or a national cadastral agency to develop. It's a capability for a government to develop. So it's whole of government. So in the leadership context, it's about engaging with your stakeholders across government and different portfolios is really important, because otherwise you risk duplication, you risk isolation, and really not being able to join up government so easily. And I think that's really important. Again, and then it's about that investment that needs to go in that and the championing that goes with it.
Great. Thanks. And yeah, I would say some of our developing countries, since they are starting at a very low level of capacity, in some ways they can leapfrog because they can go straight to a national system because they don't have all these competing regional and city-based systems in place that are, have already professional networks running them. And that might be an advantage, but I haven't seen that played out yet, except maybe in this Mongolia example. So we're looking for these examples, more of them as well.
Yeah, true.
Great. All right. Well, we'll go to Mr. Yoon, and we have a question for you, as I think your compelling story about how Korea went from a very low income to very high income, and how land development was at the core of that. How would you recommend a country that was starting out at the bottom today without the resources and capacity of a higher middle income country? How would you recommend that they start on this comprehensive NDSI path?
Okay, thank you for your question. As we all know that land informatization, including land registration and land administration, is a very basic infrastructure, but it is an invisible and intangible infrastructure like air. So it is different from the traditional infrastructure like roads, just rail roads and ports. Despite the fact that government is in many developing countries are aware of the importance of efficient land management and administration, due to this intangible infrastructure, they are not easily starting these projects that require huge budget, staffing, and time. Developing countries have been pushing for land informatization projects through the World Bank loan project and grants in many developed countries. But honestly, it is difficult to find clear results. Why is that? In order to efficiently manage and plan the land through the land information system and protect the land ownership of the people, the entire land must be registered digitally, and these information must be continuously updated and maintained. But however, the project mentioned above are literally pilot projects of the different size. For example, if World Bank funded a project with that, for example, 100 million US dollars, and Korea just OD fund just provided 1 million US dollars. Only difference between two things is the size of the pilot project. Never just cover the whole entire of the country. So that is only pilot. But problem is that even though just maybe they invested some huge budget to realize the land information and land informatization, maybe without any kind of concept of the standards and guidelines to collect the data and to share the data sharing. Maybe that is just only just an isolated project. Maybe I haven't known that, and also I experienced and I witnessed lots of cases that even though just a developing country hosted and casted many funds, but without any kind of some national level standards and guidelines and strategy, it is just only just a waste of time and waste of money. So I believe that this kind of NSDI is very essential to make some boundaries and frame to what is needed and what should be developed as a priority list. And then this kind of a standard data collection and sharing to acquire and process data is very important. And in order to take initiative on and ownership of those projects, I believe that the developing country should make effort and more focusing on just that, promoting some their national experts and the specialists. Maybe they should involve in participate in some projects at the first time when that project has been designed. So they should rebuild their will and just requirements, and that on the basis of that kind of environment, they should just ownership. They should just get the ownership on the project, and they will lead another project in the future. So I believe that the first step for the developing country is to strengthen the capacity of the national experts and accumulate the technology and experience through the active participation in the land project, even though whatever that funded by the World Bank or ADB and other countries. So I believe just a training, the step to improve the capacity building is very important for the just countries where just NSDI wanted to introduce in the country. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Yoon. And I'll go to Ms. Inter for the last question, which is, I think that your program is very comprehensive, and it looks like you have a 5-year plan to develop your national spatial data infrastructure, and it's quite interesting, you know, especially the cost benefits where you've been very specific, and even you know, passing laws and you know, all of the things that you need to do to get you know, this project in place. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think that what can other countries learn from your experience in putting that together? You know, if another country that maybe is in a similar or maybe lower capacity country than Mongolia, could they learn from your example? And you know, are there pieces of it that you could use as a template, or do you think it needs to be done in a kind of a customized way for every other country? And maybe have you spoken with other countries about your journey and shared that with them, and have they found that useful?
Thank you for the question. Yes, of course. The work that have been done and the efforts that we made, it's based on the communication, cooperation, especially in the global community. So while we are taking the journey of implementing IGF into our national spatial data infrastructure, we have learned from other developed countries, and as well as the developing countries, the same situation like Mongolia has. So for example, we learned from the Nepal, the Fiji, Tonga, and as well as the other developing countries like Korea and Australia and Indonesia, the USA, etc. So our experience, our journey could provide not only best practices for those who are taking this journey as well as the like bad practices, what we are learned. So it's a good example for the developing countries. And when we are implementing these IGF and NSDI, there are many concerns, like many governments and departments they're familiar with the geospatial because they're technical who is working in the GS domain and using maps and geospatial information on a daily basis. However, the Mongolia is now moving actively towards the digital transformation and technological advancement. The geospatial information is being the fundamental of the digital development is often overlooked by the government leaders or the cabinet. So I would like to say that please more engage with the cabinets, how this important of NSDI using the IGF as a guidance. So that's one of the key issues that I think the other countries facing as well.
Great, thanks. That's very, very useful. And I'm sure we will come back to you and use your great story as a resource. So we are at the end of our session. So I would like to thank all our panelists and our attendees for joining today. And we will, for the rest of the next 2 weeks, have additional topics in digital. And please join us any event that you think is interesting. And reach out to us if you have any other questions for us or for the panelists. I'll hand it back to you, Uni, for the wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you very much for the panelists for a very informative and engaging session. Before we wrap up, please take a minute to take the poll to tell us what you thought of the session. And once you leave the meeting, you'll also receive an email from us to share your feedback and your interest in a follow-up conversation with us. So we thank you in advance for your time and feedback. So this wraps up the morning session of today's event. We do have a showcase scheduled with the tech partners featuring their GIS and Earth observation solutions that have helped AD and other countries to analyze, map, and model different development challenges. So please come back again to take part in the exciting demonstration and how these innovation technologies can help you and your projects. So thank you again, and we hope to see you back at DigitalXADB.